Papa, look! The words cut through the damp October air like a blade. 2-year-old Leo Thorne yanked his small hand free from his father's grip. He bolted forward without warning. His little boots splashed through the puddles on the park path, sending tiny sprays of water into the cold afternoon air. "Leo, stop!" Kyle's voice was sharp with alarm, but it was already too late. The boy was a flash of bright blue jacket against the gray afternoon. He had already reached the figure huddled on the ground. Leo tugged at the woman's dirty sleeve. He looked up at her face with wide, innocent eyes, and then he said something that shattered the world. "Papa." His voice rang with absolute certainty. "Papa, that is my mama." In that single, impossible moment, Kyle Thorne's entire reality disintegrated. Every defense he had painstakingly constructed over 3 long years of grief came crashing down around him. Every wall, every barrier, every lie he had told himself just to keep breathing. All of it turned to dust. Before we go any further, let me know where you are watching from right now. Drop your location in the comments. This story is about a woman who was torn from her life. She was imprisoned for 3 years. She was fed the cruelest lie imaginable, told that the family she cherished had moved on without her. But deep inside, she refused to let her hope die. This is also the story of a man who believed he had lost the love of his life. He buried his heart under layers of bitterness and sorrow. He built an empire of power and protection, never knowing that the reality he was mourning was a carefully constructed deception. If you have ever been wounded by the betrayal of someone you trusted, if you have ever faced an enemy who seemed to have all the power, if you have ever felt so broken that you did not know how to put the pieces back together, this story will show you something important. True power is not about having control. It is about having the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And sometimes, it takes the clear, innocent eyes of a child to see the truth that broken adults have refused to recognize. Stay with me until the very end. The message in this story is one of resilience and hope, something we all need. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because tomorrow, I have another story that will change the way you see the world. Now, let us return to that cold, rainy park. The October chill had settled deep into the afternoon. The sky was a uniform shade of steel, the kind of gray that seeped into your bones and made you forget that the sun existed. Rain fell in a steady drizzle, turning the park paths into shallow rivers. The trees had lost most of their leaves. Bare branches reached toward the sky like skeleton fingers. The few remaining leaves clung desperately to their branches, waiting for the next gust of wind to send them spiraling to the ground. Kyle checked the time on his watch, 3:42 in the afternoon. They had a few more minutes for a walk before heading back to the sterile quiet of their house. It was supposed to be a normal day, a safe day, a predictable slice of their carefully managed lives. Just a father and his son, taking a walk in the park before dinner. "Papa, I am cold." Leo's small voice pulled Kyle from his thoughts. The boy's breath fogged in the chilly air. "I know, little man." Kyle knelt down on the wet path, his large hands fumbling slightly as he adjusted Leo's hood. The boy's cheeks were bright pink from the sharp wind, a stark contrast to the dreary surroundings. "Just 5 more minutes, then we are going home for hot chocolate." Leo's eyes lit up like someone had flipped a switch inside him. "With marshmallows?" A small smile touched Kyle's lips. The first real smile he had managed all day. "Yes, with lots and lots of marshmallows." Leo pumped his tiny fist in the air. "Yes, I love marshmallows. They are my favorite." Kyle reached out and ruffled his son's damp hair. "I know you do, buddy. I know you do." Leo was the only person in the entire world who could draw that smile out of him anymore. A small light in the overwhelming darkness that had become Kyle Thorne's life. The park was mostly deserted this afternoon. The rain had driven everyone sensible indoors. A few dedicated joggers pounded the wet pavement, their hoods pulled low against the drizzle. A handful of people sat alone on scattered benches, lost in their own worlds, seemingly unbothered by the cold. Kyle's first bodyguard stood a respectful distance away, a large black umbrella held over his head, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for any sign of threat. The second bodyguard was positioned further down the path, a silent, watchful presence near a large oak tree, his hands clasped in front of him. This was Kyle Thorne's reality now. A fortress of caution and professional protection. Armed men following his every move. Security protocols for something as simple as a walk in the park with his son. 3 years ago, his life had been so different. 3 years ago, he had believed in love, in family, in the possibility of leaving his dangerous world behind and starting fresh. 3 years ago, his wife had died in a fire, or so he believed. The grief had nearly destroyed him. For months after the funeral, Kyle had existed in a fog of rage and alcohol. He threw himself into his work with a reckless intensity that worried even his most loyal men. He took risks he never would have taken before. Part of him, the broken part, was almost hoping that one of those risks would catch up with him. But then Leo had started calling for his mama. The boy was too young to understand what death meant, too young to comprehend that the woman who used to sing him to sleep was never coming back. Night after night, Leo would wake up crying, asking where his mama had gone, asking when she was coming home, asking why she had left him. Those cries had saved Kyle's life, because someone had to answer them. Someone had to hold that little boy and rock him back to sleep. Someone had to be strong enough to keep going, even when everything inside them wanted to give up. So Kyle had pulled himself together, not for himself, for Leo. But the warmth that used to exist inside him was gone. The man who had once dreamed of a quiet life with the woman he loved had been replaced by something harder, something colder, something that no longer believed in second chances. But Leo made the prison of this careful life bearable. The boy's constant questions about everything under the sun, his easy, bubbling laughter at the smallest things, the way he found wonder in a puddle, a bird, a leaf falling from a tree. Leo was the only thing that made Kyle feel human anymore. That is when he heard it. A sound so faint it was almost lost in the steady drumming of the rain. A quiet, ragged sob. "She is here, Papa." Leo pointed a small, gloved finger down the walkway. "That lady is crying. Do you see her?" Kyle's gaze followed his son's hand, and his breath caught in his throat. A woman was huddled on the wet ground, no more than 30 feet away. She had folded herself into a tight ball, as if trying to disappear entirely. Her arms wrapped around her knees, her head bowed low. Her clothes were torn and caked with mud, like she had been crawling through a forest. Her dark hair hung in wet, tangled strands around her face, hiding her features. Her feet were bare, blue with cold against the dark pavement. Kyle felt his bodyguards tense behind him. He could sense them reaching for their weapons, assessing the potential threat. And then the woman lifted her head, and Kyle saw her face. "That is not possible." The words were stolen by the wind, barely a whisper. His bodyguard stepped closer, his voice low and professional. "Boss, is everything okay? Do you know this woman?" Kyle could not answer. He could not form a single word. He could not even draw a proper breath, because the face he was looking at was a face he knew better than his own. Serafina. Sarah. The woman he had loved with everything he had. The woman who had been his best friend, his partner, his confidant. The woman who had shown him that even a man like him could be loved. The woman who had died in a fire 3 years ago. The woman whose funeral he had stood through, staring at a closed coffin, feeling like someone had reached into his chest and ripped out his still beating heart. She was gone. It was a fact he had built his entire life on, a truth he had accepted, even though accepting it had nearly killed him. But then she lifted her head fully. Through the veil of falling rain, her eyes found his. And Kyle saw it. He saw pure, unclouded recognition. It was not the blank stare of a stranger. It was the look of someone who knew exactly who he was, someone who had been waiting, hoping, praying to see his face again. Her gaze was flooded with years of pain, with unbelievable shock, with a fragile, desperate hope that pierced Kyle to his very soul. For a long, frozen moment, neither of them moved. The rain fell around them. The wind whispered through the bare branches. The world held its breath. And then Leo broke free. No, Leo. But the boy was already running, a blur of motion racing toward the broken figure on the ground. He reached her side in seconds, and without any hesitation, without any fear, wrapped his small arms around her as best he could. "Papa, she is crying." Leo's voice was thick with concern. "Help her. Please, you have to help her." Kyle forced his legs to move, one step, then another. His bodyguards flanked him instantly, their hands ready, their faces grim and alert. They were trained professionals who had seen their boss handle dozens of crises with cold, calculated precision. But they had never seen him like this. They were watching Kyle Thorne, one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the city, coming completely undone. "Son, step back from her." Kyle's voice was trembling. He could hear it shaking, and he hated himself for it. "But Papa, she needs help. Look at her. She is so sad. Leo, please." Kyle reached for his son, his touch more hesitant than he intended. His entire world had narrowed to the impossible woman before him, to the terrifying, hope-filled question of whether she was truly real. He dropped to his knees on the cold, wet ground beside her. He was close enough now to see the small, angry cuts that marred her pale face. Cuts that were half-healed, some fresh, some older. Close enough to see the violent, uncontrollable tremor in her thin hands. Close enough to see the dark circles under her eyes, the hollowness in her cheeks, the way her collarbones jutted out beneath her torn shirt. She had been starved, she had been beaten, she had been through hell. But her eyes, those eyes staring back at him, wide with fear and haunted by a pain he could not comprehend, were unmistakable. They belonged to Serafina. This was not a ghost. This was not a cruel trick of his grieving mind. It was her. Kyle felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had kept locked away for 3 long years. "Get her on her feet." His voice came out raw but steady. The shock was already giving way to a cold, focused urgency. "We need to get her somewhere warm and safe, immediately." The first bodyguard moved without a word. He lifted her with surprising gentleness, like he understood somehow that this woman was precious. She was weightless in his arms, offering no resistance. She simply leaned into his support, as if all the strength had been drained from her body years ago. "Where are we taking her, boss?" "The safe house on 5th Street. The one with the fully equipped medical room." Kyle scooped a confused Leo into his own arms, holding his son tight against his chest. "Make the call now. I want our medic on site and waiting for us when we arrive. I want the building swept and secured. I want guards at every entrance, already on it." Leo squirmed in his father's embrace, his small face etched with concern as he tried to get a better look at the silent woman being carried toward their vehicle. "Papa, where are we taking the lady?" "To a safe place, buddy. A place where no one can hurt her." "Is she sick?" "Yes." The word caught in Kyle's throat. "But we have doctors. They are going to help her feel better. Will you stay with her?" Leo's innocent question landed like a physical blow. "She looks very, very scared." "I do not think she should be alone." A thick knot of emotion formed in Kyle's throat. "We will see, buddy. We will see." Now here is where this story takes a turn that will change everything. I want you to pay close attention to what happens next, because the lesson here is one that could change your life. Power is supposed to protect what is yours. Kyle Thorne had power. He had money. He had influence. He had an army of loyal men who would follow him into the depths of hell and back. But for 3 years, all of that power had done absolutely nothing. It had failed to protect the one person who mattered most. That failure haunted him every single day. It followed him like a shadow. It whispered to him in the dark hours of the night. It reminded him, over and over again, that all his strength meant nothing if he could not keep his family safe. Now, the woman he had mourned for 3 years was being carried to his vehicle. And what you are about to hear is what happens when a powerful man finally learns the truth about who his real enemies are. The journey to the safe house was shrouded in heavy silence. Sarah sat in the back of the large SUV, her thin body pressed against the door, her gaze fixed on the passing city through the rain-streaked window. She looked at the familiar streets like a ghost seeing a life she once knew. Buildings she used to pass every day on her way to work. The coffee shop where she and Kyle had their first real conversation. The park where he had proposed to her under a canopy of stars. A world that had continued on without her. Kyle watched her from the corner of his eye. He noticed everything. He noticed the tense set of her shoulders, the way her fingers dug into the leather seat like she expected to be torn away at any moment. He noticed the scars on her wrists, thin white lines that had not been there 3 years ago. He noticed the way she flinched at the sound of a distant siren. 3 years. Where had she been for 3 years? What had happened to her? Who had done this to her? The questions burned in Kyle's mind, but he forced himself to stay silent. Now was not the time. She was fragile, broken. Pushing her too hard too fast could shatter whatever was left. Leo had drifted off to sleep between them, the emotional storm of the day finally overwhelming his small body. His head rested against Kyle's arm, his breathing slow and peaceful. Even in sleep, the boy seemed to sense something important was happening. He stirred, his eyes fluttered open, and the first thing he did was look for Sarah. His gaze found her immediately, like he needed to confirm that she was still there, that she had not vanished like a dream. When he saw her, still sitting by the window, still real and present, something in his small face relaxed. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement that came entirely from him, Leo reached out his small hand toward her. "Do not be scared." His voice was a soft whisper that filled the entire vehicle. "Papa is here. He is going to help you. He always helps people. That is what he does." A choked sob escaped Sarah's lips. Her own trembling hand rose to meet Leo's. As their fingers touched, she carefully drew his little hand to her face. She pressed his palm against her cold cheek like it was the most precious treasure in the entire world. Like it was the only real thing in a nightmare that had lasted 3 years. "Thank you." Her voice cracked on the words. "Thank you, sweet boy." Kyle felt a profound warmth spread through his chest, a sensation he thought he had lost forever, buried with the woman he had mourned for 3 years. His own hand moved, coming to rest on Leo's coat, just an inch from where Sarah's hand lay. Their skin did not touch, but the space between them pulsed with a fragile, unspoken connection. For the first time in 3 years, they were close. The safe house came into view through the rain. It was a fortress disguised as a forgotten commercial building, tucked away in a quiet, industrial part of the city where no one looked twice. From the outside, it appeared abandoned. Weathered brick, dirty windows, the kind of place people walked past without a second glance. But inside, it was a different world entirely. As the vehicle rolled to a gentle stop, Sarah exited slowly. Her bare feet touched the cold concrete of the sidewalk. She winced at the chill but did not complain. Her hand was still loosely holding onto Leo's. They stood together on the clean sidewalk, a broken but complete picture. Kyle came to stand beside them, creating a protective barrier between his family and the rest of the world. "Tomorrow." His voice was low and firm, a promise carved in stone. "I will bring Leo to see you in the morning. First thing, I give you my word. Tomorrow." Sarah repeated the word like it was sacred, like it was a gift she never expected to receive again. Leo looked from his father's determined face to his mother's tear-streaked one. A small, hopeful smile lit up his features. Kyle's hand settled on his son's shoulder, right beside Sarah's. Their fingers were so close now. almost brushing. She is not going anywhere. Kyle's voice was steel. And neither are we. Sarah's answering smile was real. The first genuine smile he had seen in 3 years. It shone through her tears like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Kyle gave a sharp nod to his bodyguard, who gently guided Sarah toward the entrance. She looked back over her shoulder one last time. Her gaze locked with Kyle's. A silent exchange passed between them. Pain, questions, a flicker of trust that had survived 3 years of hell. Then she disappeared inside. Papa. Leo let out a massive yawn, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. Are we going to be okay now? Kyle lifted his son into his arms, holding him against his chest like he was the most important thing in the world. Because he was. Yes, buddy. Kyle's voice was thick with emotion. I think we are finally going to be just fine. The safe house was immaculately clean, completely secure, stocked with enough food, medical supplies, and comforts to last for months. Kyle had relied on this sanctuary on 2 other desperate occasions in the past 5 years. Both times, every person who entered had walked away alive and unharmed. His head of security met them at the reinforced steel door. The man's name was Marcus. He was built like a concrete wall, with a shaved head and arms like tree trunks. He had been with Kyle for 7 years. Utterly loyal, absolutely lethal. The building is completely secure, boss. Our medic is already upstairs and waiting. Good. Kyle's voice was clipped. Commanding. I want 2 guards posted at every single entrance, armed, alert. Nobody gets in or out unless they have my direct permission. Understood. The interior of the building was a stark contrast to its weathered exterior. Spotless, professionally maintained, every surface gleaming under bright clinical lighting. The walls were reinforced concrete. The windows were bulletproof glass. The doors were steel, operated by biometric locks. They took a secure elevator to the 3rd floor, where the medical room was located. It was a brightly lit space, equipped with the precision and cleanliness of a small private doctor's office. Examination tables, heart monitors, IV drips, emergency surgical equipment. Sarah was already there. She was lying on a sterile examination bed as the medic quietly checked her vital signs. Her eyes were open now, and some of the terrifying emptiness had been replaced with a fragile awareness. Kyle gently set Leo down just inside the doorway. I need you to stay right here for a minute. The boy's eyes were wide with concern. Okay, but I really want to see her up close. Just give me 1 minute, then you can come over, I promise. Kyle's voice was gentle but carried an undeniable weight of command. He approached the bed slowly, stopping a few feet away. Creating a space she would not feel was threatening. The medic looked up, his expression professional and calm. She is suffering from severe hypothermia and significant dehydration. She has a number of bruises and minor cuts across her body, but my initial assessment shows nothing that appears to be life-threatening. He paused. She needs rest, warmth, and proper nutrition. With good care, I am confident she will make a full physical recovery. Kyle's gaze never left Sarah's face. Can she talk? The medic nodded. Yes. She is much more lucid now that she is warm and feeling safe. Kyle gave a slight nod of dismissal. He waited until the room was empty except for him, Sarah, and the 2 bodyguards standing like statues at the door. He looked directly at her face. She met his gaze with a look of terrified, desperate hope. Serafina. His voice was steady, a carefully controlled monotone that revealed nothing of the storm raging inside him. Do you know who I am? Her eyes, pools of exhaustion and fear, remained fixed on his face. Kyle. Her voice was a dry, hoarse rasp, but the name was perfectly clear. Hearing his name from her lips after all this time felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of him. It was like rediscovering a beautiful, painful song you thought you had forgotten forever. Boss. The 2nd bodyguard's voice cut through the charged silence. He was looking up from his laptop. Facial recognition confirms her identity 100%. Serafina Vasco, officially declared missing and presumed deceased 3 years ago. He met Kyle's eyes. It is definitely her. Kyle's voice was cold. Run a complete background check. I need to know everything that has happened since she disappeared. Every location, every contact, everything. On it. Papa. Leo's small, uncertain voice broke the tension. The little boy had quietly moved closer to the bed. He was reaching a tentative hand toward Sarah. Papa, can I hold her hand now? Kyle looked from his son's innocent face to Sarah's. Her expression was a fragile tapestry of gentle hope and profound sadness. He took a long, slow breath. Yes, buddy, you can hold her hand now. A brilliant, pure smile spread across Leo's face. He carefully took Sarah's cold hand between both of his small, warm ones. Hi. His voice was serious, important. I am Leo. I am 2 years old. What is your name? Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, shimmering, but not falling. I am Sarah. It is so very nice to meet you, Leo. He looked at her with childlike sincerity. You are really pretty, even with that sad face. My papa says people look prettier when they smile. A soft, broken laugh escaped her. Thank you, sweetheart. I will try to smile more. Kyle watched the two of them together, and he saw it instantly, with a clarity that stole his breath. They had the same dark eyes, the same curve of their smile. The way Leo tilted his head when he was curious was the exact same gesture Sarah used to make. Boss. The bodyguard cleared his throat. The initial search is not showing anything suspicious in her recent history. No criminal record, no warrants, no red flags. As far as the system is concerned, she is clean. Kyle's voice was low. Keep digging anyway. Go deeper. Sarah looked at Kyle, her eyes pleading. I know you must have so many questions. I will tell you everything, every single detail. Just please. Her voice cracked. Please do not send me away yet. Kyle's voice was resolute. A stone anchor in the storm. I am not sending you anywhere. He stepped closer to the bed. But I do need answers. We can start with where you have been for the last 3 years. Sarah drew a shaky, shuddering breath, and then she began to speak. They took me that night, at the coffee shop. I never even made it through the front door. Her hands trembled in Leo's gentle grip. I was walking up the sidewalk. I had my laptop bag over my shoulder. I was thinking about what I wanted to order. She paused, and then someone came up behind me. I felt something pressed against my back. A voice told me to walk to the van, or they would shoot me right there. Kyle's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. Who? Sarah's eyes met his. It was your second in command. The words hit Kyle like a sledgehammer to the chest. James? James Porter. The man Kyle had trusted above all others. The man who had been by his side for nearly a decade. The man who was supposedly killed in the same explosion that took Sarah. He told me he wanted to take over your organization. Sarah's voice grew stronger, fueled by the memory of the injustice. He said he needed you to be broken and distracted, so that your own people would lose faith in you and turn against you. Kyle felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He faked all of it. Sarah continued. The video that showed me meeting with your rival, the financial records that made it look like I was stealing from you. All of the evidence against me was fabricated. Every single piece. She paused, her eyes dark with the memory. The explosion at the warehouse? That was his cover. He needed everyone to believe I was dead so you would finally stop searching for me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But he kept me alive. He told me I was his insurance policy, a card to be played if he ever lost control. Kyle's fists tightened at his sides, his knuckles turning white. 3 years. For 3 entire agonizing years, she had been gone from his life, and he had spent every one of those days believing she was the one who had betrayed him, the one who had shattered his world. So what changed? His voice was a low growl. Why are you out now? He died about 6 months ago. Sarah's voice was hollow. A sudden heart attack. But his partner immediately took over. A man named Viktor Kozlov. She glanced down at her bare, bruised feet. He is worse, Kyle. He is so much worse. Her voice began to shake. Your second in command kept me locked away like a secret. But Kozlov, he wanted to break me completely, for sport, for entertainment. Kyle felt ice spreading through his veins. He told me every single day that you had moved on, that you were happy with a new woman, that you had forgotten all about me. Sarah's voice finally cracked, and he told me that my baby was dead. Kyle felt his blood turn to ice. The world seemed to stop. What did you just say? The tears Sarah had been holding back began to fall. They told me our baby did not survive the birth. For 3 long years, I believed I had lost my child before I ever even got to hold him. She looked at Leo. Fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. And then I finally escaped. And I saw you in the park with him. I saw his face. I saw my own eyes looking back at me. Her whole body trembled. And in that moment, I knew they had lied about everything. Leo, seeing her distress, climbed onto the edge of the bed. He wrapped his small arms around Sarah's neck. Do not cry. His voice was pure and simple. I am right here. I am not dead. See? I am right here with you. Kyle had to turn away. He clenched and unclenched his hands. The rage building inside him was a monstrous, unfamiliar thing, hotter and more violent than any anger he had ever felt in his life. They had not just stolen Sarah from him. They had not just stolen 3 years. They had tortured her with the cruelest, most unimaginable lie. They had deliberately made a mother believe her own child was dead. I have to see proof. Kyle's voice was barely a controlled whisper. He needed something real to anchor him. Let me see your left shoulder. Sarah's hand moved hesitantly to her shoulder. With a slight tremble, she lowered the thin fabric of the hospital gown. Kyle remembered the scar instantly. A pale, jagged line from a bullet graze long ago. A night they had barely survived together. A night he had never forgotten. A newer, uglier mark was next to it now. A vicious burn. But the old scar was still undeniably there. He tried to burn it off me. Sarah's voice was hollow. He wanted to make sure I could never be properly identified if I escaped. He just did not go deep enough to erase it completely. Kyle stared at the brutal truth branded on her skin. But there was more. Beneath the angry red burn mark, he could see other scars. A network of thin, white lines. The circular, puckered marks of cigarette burns. The physical evidence of 3 years of systematic, relentless cruelty. I believe you. The words felt heavy and inadequate. Relief washed over Sarah's face so completely that it seemed to crumple. All the strength she had been holding on to finally letting go. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. Kyle dragged a hand through his hair. But Sarah, my world is complicated now. Our life. It is not safe for you or for him. He looked at her directly. You will stay here, where you can be protected. You will have the best security. Food, medical care, anything you need. He paused. Leo and I are going to visit you every single day. Her head snapped up. Every day? Her voice was filled with a fragile hope he had not heard in years. Starting tomorrow morning? He glanced down at Leo, who was still holding her hand tightly. Is that right, buddy? Leo nodded enthusiastically. Right. We are having breakfast together, the 3 of us. And I want pancakes. That night, after putting Leo to bed, Kyle sat alone in his office, a heavy glass of whiskey in his hand. The house was silent around him. His thoughts drifted back through the years. He remembered meeting Sarah at a charity fundraiser 4 years ago. She had worn a simple white dress and possessed the warmest, most genuine smile he had ever witnessed in his life. She was a nurse, a woman from a world completely separate from his dangerous existence. She had no idea about the man he really was. Their first date had been at a botanical garden. Kyle had felt foolish and completely out of place surrounded by flowers and sunlight. But Sarah made it all seem natural and easy. She had laughed when he admitted he did not know the names of any of the plants. And then she had playfully tucked a jasmine flower behind his ear. There. Her eyes had sparkled with mischief. Now you almost look friendly. For 6 months, their world existed in stolen moments and late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. He had a dangerous business, and eventually she learned its true nature. But she never recoiled in fear. I see the real man underneath all of this, she had told him once, and that is the person I have fallen in love with. A year after that confession, she was pleading with him to leave it all behind. We can start over somewhere else, she had begged. A small town, new identities, a completely new life. He wanted that future more than he had ever wanted anything. In secret, he started to put the pieces in place, arranging their escape with the very few people he trusted completely. Only his second-in-command knew every detail, the one man Kyle would have staked his life on without hesitation, and that trust had destroyed everything. Kyle reached into the bottom drawer of his desk. The pressed jasmine flower was still there, its delicate white petals faded and fragile with age. He had stared at that flower 1,000 times over the last 3 years. Each time, it filled him with bitter rage. But now, as he looked at it, a completely different feeling surfaced. A profound, suffocating regret. A terrifying flicker of hope. And beneath it all, a deep, gnawing fear that this was a second chance he did not deserve. A sharp knock on his office door broke through his thoughts. A security guard entered, holding a tablet. "Boss, we discovered something important." Kyle set down his glass. "Your old second-in-command was maintaining several offshore bank accounts. We traced huge deposits that started months before the night of the explosion." The guard paused. "We also found a direct connection to Viktor Kozlov. They were partners from the very beginning, planning to eliminate you and take over." Kyle's voice was dangerously quiet. "And Kozlov? He is still active. He is the one who has been running the operation that held Sarah captive for the last 6 months." Kyle stood up from his desk and walked slowly to the window overlooking the city. "Find me everything. Every account, every transfer, every name. I want a complete list of every person who helped them destroy my life." His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "And then we are going to pay Mr. Kozlov a very personal visit." The investigation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of gathering evidence, building an airtight case, mapping out every corner of Kozlov's operation. During that time, Kyle and Leo visited Sarah at the safe house every single day. They ate breakfast together every morning. Leo would chatter endlessly about his toys, his favorite cartoons, his dreams of getting a puppy someday. Sarah listened to every word like it was poetry. She was learning her son, learning the boy she had missed for 3 years, learning his laugh, his habits, his favorite foods, and slowly, day by day, she began to heal. The dark circles under her eyes faded. The hollowness in her cheeks filled out. The haunted look began to lift. Kyle watched the transformation with something like wonder. She was coming back to life, and so was he. 2 weeks after finding Sarah in the park, everything was ready. The takedown happened at 3 in the morning. Kyle's team moved with surgical precision. They hit Kozlov's compound from multiple directions simultaneously. The outer guards were neutralized within minutes. When they reached the main building, Kozlov was waiting. He was sitting behind a massive desk in his private office, a glass of cognac in his hand. "Kyle Thorne." Kozlov's voice was calm. "I wondered when you would come." Kyle stopped in the center of the room. "You took something from me. 3 years ago, you helped a traitor steal my wife. You kept her in darkness. You tortured her. You told her that her child was dead." Kozlov shrugged. "Business." Kyle's voice was ice. "She was not business. She was my family, and you are going to pay for every single day of those 3 years. Kozlov laughed. You think this ends with me? I have powerful friends. Kyle smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Your friends are already distancing themselves. Your accounts are frozen. Your associates are being arrested as we speak. He dropped a thick folder on the desk. Every crime, every victim, every transaction, ready for federal prosecutors. For the first time, fear flickered in Kozlov's eyes. You are going to spend the rest of your life in prison, and every single day, you will remember that I am the one who put you there. Kyle turned to his men. Take him. The monster who had haunted Sarah's nightmares was finally powerless. Kyle watched him being dragged away, then he walked out into the pre-dawn darkness. It was over. That morning, Kyle brought Sarah home, real home. Leo was waiting at the front door, bouncing with excitement. Is Sarah staying? Is she really staying forever? Yes, buddy. Forever. Leo let out a triumphant whoop and immediately reached for Sarah. She held him tight, breathing in the scent of her child. Welcome home, Mama. It was the first time he had called her that. Sarah's tears fell freely, but she was smiling. Thank you, my baby. Thank you for finding me. The months that followed were not easy. Sarah had nightmares. There were moments of panic, times when she would freeze at unexpected sounds. But they faced it together. And slowly, she found her way back to herself. She started cooking breakfast every morning. She started reading to Leo every night. She started laughing again. Really laughing. 6 months later, Kyle and Sarah stood in the garden. The jasmine she had planted was in full bloom. Leo was nearby, chasing butterflies. Kyle pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. Simple. Elegant. 3 stones. The first ring represented our past. This one represents our future. If you will still have me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Kyle lowered himself to one knee. Serafina Vasco, will you marry me? For real this time? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Leo came running over. What is happening? Your mother just agreed to marry me, buddy. Leo's eyes went wide. Does this mean we are a real family now? Sarah knelt to his level. We have always been a real family, but now we are making it official. Can I be in the wedding? You will be the most important person there. Leo pumped his fist in the air. Best day ever. The 3 of them stood together in the garden, the sun warm on their faces, the jasmine blooming around them. For the first time in 4 long years, everything felt exactly right. This story was carefully developed to bring real value into your life. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Sarah spent 3 years in darkness, believing she had lost everything. But she never let her hope die. She never stopped fighting. And in the end, her strength brought her home. If you are going through something difficult right now, remember this. Your story is not finished. The people who try to break you do not get to write your final chapter. Only you can do that. It is your hand holding the pen. If this story touched your heart, you need to see what is coming next. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Trust me, you will not regret it. I will see you there. But before we end, let me take you back through the most important moments of this journey, because there are lessons here that I do not want you to miss. When Kyle found Sarah in that park, broken and barely alive, he had a choice to make. He could have walked away. He could have told himself it was impossible. He could have let his fear and his doubt convince him that his eyes were playing tricks. But he did not. He chose to believe. He chose to hope. He chose to take a chance on something that seemed completely impossible. And that choice changed everything. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times have you been faced with something that seemed impossible? How many times have you wanted to give up because the odds were stacked against you? How many times have you let fear convince you to walk away from something that could have changed your life? Kyle Thorne was a powerful man. He had money, He had influence, he had an army of loyal followers, but none of that mattered when he found Sarah. What mattered was his willingness to believe, his willingness to hope, his willingness to fight for the people he loved, even when everything seemed lost. That is real power. Not the money in your bank account, not the title on your business card, not the number of people who follow your orders. Real power is the strength to keep going when everything inside you wants to give up. Real power is the courage to believe in something bigger than your fear. Real power is the love that refuses to die, no matter how dark things get. Sarah spent 3 years in that basement. 3 years of darkness, 3 years of lies, 3 years of being told that everyone she loved had forgotten her. But she never stopped hoping. She never stopped believing that somehow, someday, she would find her way back to her family. And that hope kept her alive. When Viktor Kozlov told her that her baby was dead, she could have given up completely. She could have let the grief destroy her. She could have stopped fighting. But she did not. Somewhere deep inside her, a small flame refused to go out. A voice that whispered, "Keep going. Do not give up. There is still a chance." And that voice was right, because 3 years later, that chance arrived. A little boy with her eyes and her smile tugged on her sleeve in a rainy park and said 4 words that changed everything. "Papa, that is my mama." Leo saw the truth that the adults had missed. He saw through the dirt and the tears and the years of suffering. He saw his mother. And in that moment, everything changed. That is the power of innocence. That is the power of a child's pure, uncomplicated love. Leo did not care about the evidence that said his mother was dead. He did not care about the logic that said it was impossible. He looked at that broken woman and he saw the truth. And he was not afraid to say it out loud. Sometimes we make things too complicated. We overthink, we overanalyze, we talk ourselves out of believing in miracles. But children do not do that. Children see the world as it is, not as we have convinced ourselves it must be. And sometimes that pure, simple way of seeing is exactly what we need to find our way back to the truth. Kyle and Sarah had to rebuild their relationship from scratch. 3 years is a long time. People change, circumstances change. The world keeps moving even when your heart has stopped. Kyle had spent those years believing Sarah betrayed him. He had hardened his heart. He had built walls. He had convinced himself that love was a weakness he could not afford. And Sarah had spent those years believing Kyle had moved on. She had been told, day after day, that he was happy without her, that he had a new woman, that he had forgotten all about her. Those lies had done their damage. Even after the truth came out, there were moments of doubt. Moments when old wounds resurfaced. Moments when the pain of those lost years threatened to overwhelm them. But they chose to fight for each other. They chose to believe that their love was stronger than the lies. They chose to build something new instead of dwelling on what had been destroyed. And that choice made all the difference. Rebuilding is hard. Whether it is a relationship, a career, a dream, or simply your own sense of self, the process of putting the pieces back together is never easy. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes a willingness to be vulnerable, even when you are scared. It takes the courage to try again, even when you have failed before. But it is possible. If Kyle and Sarah could find their way back to each other after 3 years of hell, then there is hope for all of us. No matter how broken things seem, no matter how lost you feel, no matter how impossible the future looks, there is always a chance. There is always hope. There is always a way forward. You just have to be willing to take the first step. The wedding was small. Just close friends and family gathered in the garden where the jasmine bloomed. Leo walked down the aisle with the rings on a velvet pillow, his face serious with the importance of his job. Sarah wore a simple white dress that reminded Kyle of the night they first met. And when they said their vows, there was not a dry eye in the garden. "I thought I lost you," Kyle said, his voice rough with emotion. "For 3 years I lived in darkness. I went through the motions, but I was not really alive. And then Leo found you in that park, and everything changed. He took her hands in his. I promise to never stop fighting for you. I promise to never stop believing in us. I promise to spend every single day of the rest of my life making sure you know how much you are loved. Sarah's tears fell freely as she spoke her own vows. They tried to break me, she said. They told me lies. They tried to make me forget who I was and who I loved. But they failed. Because even in the darkest moments, I held on to you. I held on to the memory of your smile. I held on to the dream of coming home. She squeezed his hands. I promise to never give up on us. I promise to fight for our family no matter what. I promise to spend the rest of my life being grateful for this second chance. Leo, standing between them, looked up with shining eyes. Are you two done being mushy? Because I really want some cake. The garden erupted in laughter. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the sweet scent of jasmine, the Thorne family was finally, truly complete. 1 year later, they stood in that same garden. But this time, there was someone new. Sarah held a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket, a baby girl with her father's eyes and her mother's smile. What are we going to name her? Leo asked, peering at his new sister with wonder. Kyle and Sarah looked at each other and smiled. Hope, Sarah said softly. We are going to name her Hope, because that is what brought us back together, Kyle added, and that is what we want her to carry with her every single day of her life. Leo nodded seriously. I like it. Hope. I am going to teach her everything I know. Sarah laughed. I am sure you will, sweetheart. They stood together in the garden, the four of them now. 2 parents, 2 children, 1 family. The jasmine bloomed around them. The sun was warm on their faces. And for the first time in 5 long years, everything was exactly as it should be. This story was carefully researched, developed, and edited to deliver meaningful lessons and bring real value to your life. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. Sarah spent 3 years in darkness, convinced that she had lost everything that ever mattered. But even in the shadows, she refused to let go of hope. She never gave up her fight for a better tomorrow. And in the end, it was that unbreakable strength that finally guided her back home. If you find yourself walking through a difficult valley in your own life right now, I want you to hold on to this one truth. Your story is not finished yet. The people who tried to shatter your spirit do not have the authority to write your final chapter. That power belongs to you and only you. It is your hand holding the pen. And often, the very trial that was designed to be your destruction becomes the unexpected source of a profound strength you never knew you possessed. It forges you into something new, something stronger, something beautiful. If this story resonated deep within your heart, then prepare yourself for what we have waiting for you next. Do not leave just yet. Click on the video that is appearing on your screen right now. It will lead you into another incredible story that is guaranteed to capture your imagination and touch your soul. I give you my word. It is a journey you will be so glad you took. You will not be disappointed. I will see you there. Let me share a few more details about what happened during those crucial weeks of healing. The first morning at the safe house, Kyle arrived with Leo at exactly 7 o'clock. They found Sarah sitting up in bed, wearing clean clothes that someone had brought her during the night. Her hair was brushed. Her face had more color than the day before. But her eyes still held the shadows of 3 years of darkness. We brought breakfast. Leo announced this like he was declaring victory in a great war. He climbed onto the bed carefully, balancing a foam container of pancakes. I picked the ones with chocolate chips because those are the best kind. Sarah looked at the food, then at Leo, then at Kyle, and something shifted in her expression. For a moment, the shadows retreated. Thank you, sweetheart. This looks wonderful. She ate slowly at first. Her stomach had shrunk during the years of captivity. Large meals made her sick. But bite by bite, she finished half the pancakes. Leo watched her with careful attention. "You need to eat more so you can get strong," he informed her seriously. "That is what Papa always tells me when I do not want to finish my vegetables." Sarah smiled. "Your Papa is a very smart man." Kyle felt something warm spread through his chest at those words. Such a simple thing, but it meant everything. After breakfast, Leo insisted on showing Sarah his entire collection of toy dinosaurs. He had brought them in a backpack, carefully organized by size and species. "This one is a T-Rex. He is the king of all the dinosaurs. And this one is a Triceratops. He has 3 horns, see? And this one—" Leo went through every single dinosaur, explaining their names, their diets, their special abilities. Sarah listened to every word. She asked questions. She made impressed sounds at the appropriate moments. She let Leo arrange the dinosaurs on her bed in what he called their battle formation. And watching them together, Kyle saw something he had not seen in 3 years. He saw joy, real, genuine, uncomplicated joy. It was in the way Sarah's eyes crinkled when she smiled. It was in the way her laugh rang out, surprised and delighted, when Leo made one of his silly jokes. It was in the way she reached out to touch his hair, his cheek, his small hands, as if she still could not quite believe he was real. 3 years of darkness. 3 years of believing her child was dead. And now here he was, showing her his toy dinosaurs and explaining why the velociraptor was actually his favorite, even though everyone thought it should be the T-Rex. Kyle had to step out of the room for a moment. He stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, taking deep breaths. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried at Sarah's funeral. He had not cried during the 3 years of grief that followed. But standing in that hallway, listening to his son's happy chatter and his wife's delighted responses, Kyle felt tears burning in his eyes. Tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears for all the moments they had lost and all the moments they were finally getting back. "Boss?" Marcus appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression concerned. "Everything okay?" Kyle cleared his throat and straightened up. "Yeah, everything is fine." He paused. "Actually, everything is better than fine." Marcus nodded slowly, a rare smile crossing his usually stern face. "Glad to hear it, boss. Glad to hear it." The second day, Sarah asked about the investigation. Kyle had been careful not to discuss Kozlov or the operation in front of Leo, but during the boys' afternoon nap, Sarah brought it up herself. "I need to know what is happening." Her voice was steady, but Kyle could see the tension in her shoulders. "I need to know that he is going to pay for what he did." Kyle sat down across from her. "We are building a case, a comprehensive one. Every crime, every victim, every transaction. We are making sure there is no way he walks away from this." Sarah nodded slowly. "And your second in command?" "James? He is dead. Has been for 6 months. Heart attack." Kyle's jaw tightened. "But that does not mean he escapes justice. We are documenting everything he did too. His name is going to be connected to every single crime. His legacy is going to be nothing but shame." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "I do not want to be afraid anymore." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "For 3 years I lived in fear. Every day, every hour, every minute. And I am done with that." She took a breath. "I want to testify. Against Kozlov. Against everyone involved. I want to look them in the eyes and tell the world what they did." Kyle studied her face. "Are you sure? It would mean reliving everything. Publicly." "I am sure." Her voice did not waver. "They wanted to erase me. They wanted to make me disappear. But I am still here. And I want them to know that they failed." Kyle reached out and took her hand. "Then that is what we will do." The investigation moved quickly after that. Kyle's team worked around the clock, tracking down every lead, documenting every connection. Sarah provided testimony that filled in crucial gaps. Names she had overheard, locations she could describe, details that only someone who had been inside the operation could know. Her memory was remarkable. Even after 3 years of trauma, she remembered specific conversations, specific dates, specific faces. Every piece of information brought them closer to Koslov. And every day, Sarah grew stronger. Physically, the transformation was visible. The hollows in her cheeks filled out. The dark circles under her eyes faded. The tremor in her hands steadied. But the emotional healing was even more remarkable. She started sleeping through the night, most nights at least. She started laughing more easily. She started talking about the future, something she had not been able to do in those first days. One evening, about a week after coming to the safe house, Sarah asked Kyle to stay after Leo fell asleep. They sat together on the small couch in her room, a respectful distance between them. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah's voice was soft. "Of course. When I was in that basement, I used to imagine this." She gestured at the room around them. "Not this specifically, but being somewhere safe, being warm, having enough food to eat. And you. I used to imagine you coming to find me." Kyle felt his throat tighten. "I never stopped looking." His voice was rough. "Even when I believed the worst about you, there was a part of me that kept searching, that could not accept that you were really gone." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know. I can see it now. The way you have been these past few days. You are not just relieved that I am alive. You are grieving." Kyle was quiet for a moment. "I am grieving the 3 years we lost. I am grieving the man I became when I thought you had betrayed me. I am grieving all the things I should have done differently." Sarah reached out and touched his hand. "We cannot change the past, but we can choose what comes next." Kyle looked at her. "What do you want to come next?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to be a family, a real family. I want to watch our son grow up. I want to be there for his first day of school, and his first soccer game, and his first heartbreak." She paused. "And I want to do it with you. If you still want that too." Kyle turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. "I never stopped wanting that. Not for a single day." They sat together in the quiet room, hands intertwined, not speaking. Sometimes there are no words for the things that matter most. Sometimes you just have to sit in the silence and let the truth sink in. They were alive. They were together. And they had a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had been destroyed. The takedown of Koslov's operation was not just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure that no other woman would ever go through what Sarah had endured. It was about sending a message that there are some lines you do not cross, some crimes you do not get away with, some debts that must be paid. Kyle's team documented everything. They found records of other victims, women who had been trafficked through Kozlov's network, women who had been abused, women who had been silenced. With each discovery, Kyle's resolve hardened. This was not just about his family anymore. This was about all the families that had been destroyed, all the lives that had been shattered, all the voices that had been silenced. When his team finally moved on Kozlov's compound, they were not just taking down one man, they were dismantling an entire network of cruelty and exploitation. The federal authorities who arrived to make the arrests found evidence of crimes spanning multiple countries: human trafficking, money laundering, corruption, murder. Koslov would spend the rest of his life in prison, and everyone who had helped him would face justice too. But for Kyle, the most important moment came 3 months later. He was sitting in the courtroom when Sarah took the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head held high. She looked directly at Koslov as she told her story. Every detail, every horror, every lie. Her voice did not waver. When she finished, Kyle could see that something had changed in her. The last shadows had lifted from her eyes. She had faced her nightmare, and she had won. After the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts, Kyle found Sarah standing outside the courthouse. She was looking up at the sky, tears streaming down her face. "It is really over." Her voice was barely a whisper. Kyle came to stand beside her. "How do you feel?" Sarah thought about it for a moment. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel completely free." Kyle pulled her into his arms. They stood there on the courthouse steps, holding each other, as the world went on around them. It was over. They could finally move forward. They could finally live. The first year of their new life together was a journey of rediscovery. Sarah had to learn how to be free again. After 3 years of captivity, even the simplest things felt strange and overwhelming. The ability to walk outside whenever she wanted. The ability to eat whatever she chose. The ability to sleep in a real bed with clean sheets and soft pillows. The ability to see the sky. She would stand in this garden sometimes, just looking up at the clouds, breathing in the fresh air, reminding herself that this was real, that she was really here, that she was really free. Kyle watched her during those moments. He never interrupted. He understood that she needed time, time to heal, time to trust, time to believe that the nightmare was truly over. Leo, in his innocent way, helped more than anyone. Children do not dwell on the past. They live in the present moment with a purity that adults have forgotten. Every morning, Leo would bounce into Sarah's room to wake her up. "Mama, the sun is up. Time to start the day." And Sarah would smile and pull him into a hug and marvel at the miracle of having him there. Her son, alive and healthy and happy. The child she had believed was dead for 3 long years. Kyle made changes to their life. He stepped back from the more dangerous aspects of his business. He delegated to people he trusted. He put his family first in a way he never had before. Because he understood now that all the money and power in the world meant nothing if you lost the people you loved. He had been given a second chance. He was not going to waste it. They moved to a new house, a modest, comfortable place on a quiet street. No armed guards at every entrance, no bulletproof windows, no panic rooms, just a normal home where a normal family could live a normal life. Sarah planted jasmine in the garden. Every time she smelled those flowers, she remembered. She remembered the night Kyle proposed the first time. She remembered the years they had lost. She remembered the miracle that had brought them back together. Leo started preschool. On his first day, both his parents walked him to the door. Sarah cried. Kyle pretended not to cry. Leo rolled his eyes at both of them. "It is just school," he informed them. "I will see you this afternoon." But he hugged them both extra tight before he went inside. That afternoon, when they picked him up, Leo had a drawing to show them. It was 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall one with dark hair, a medium one with long hair, a small one in the middle. "That is us," Leo explained. "That is our family." Sarah framed that drawing and hung it in the kitchen. It was the most beautiful piece of art she had ever seen. Months passed. The seasons changed. Spring turned to summer, turned to fall, turned to winter. And somewhere along the way, the healing became complete. The nightmares stopped. The panic attacks faded. The shadows lifted from Sarah's eyes and never returned. She laughed easily now. She slept peacefully. She looked forward to each new day instead of dreading it. And Kyle. Kyle discovered something he had forgotten was possible. He discovered how to be happy. Not the temporary happiness of a successful business deal or an enemy defeated. Real happiness. The kind that comes from sitting at the breakfast table with your family, listening to your son talk about his dreams while your wife smiles at you across the table. The kind that comes from quiet evenings in the garden, watching the sunset with the woman you love. The kind that comes from knowing that no matter what happens tomorrow, you have everything that truly matters right here, right now. That was the life Kyle Thorne finally built. Not a fortress of power and protection. A home, a family, a future. When baby Hope was born, she completed the picture. Sarah held her daughter for the first time and wept. Tears of joy, tears of gratitude, tears for all the miracles that had brought them to this moment. Kyle stood beside her, one hand on Sarah's shoulder, the other holding Leo up so he could see his new sister. "She is really small," Leo observed. "She will get bigger," Kyle assured him. "Can I teach her about dinosaurs? You can teach her everything you know." Leo nodded seriously. "That is a lot of responsibility, but I am ready." Sarah laughed through her tears, and in that hospital room, surrounded by the three people she loved most in the world, she knew that she was the luckiest woman alive. Not because of the money, not because of the security, because of the love, because of the family, because of the second chance she had been given, and the beautiful life she was building with it. 5 years later, a reporter asked Sarah about her experience. It was the anniversary of Kozlov's conviction. The media wanted to do a retrospective piece. Sarah agreed to the interview. She sat in their garden, surrounded by blooming jasmine, and answered questions with calm honesty. The reporter asked what advice she would give to others who had survived trauma. Sarah thought about it for a moment. "Keep hoping," she said finally, "even when everything seems hopeless. Even when the darkness feels like it will never end. Keep a small flame burning inside you, because you never know when that flame is going to light the way home." She paused. "And when you finally find your way back to the light, do not waste a single moment. Tell the people you love that you love them. Forgive the things that need forgiving. Let go of the anger and the bitterness and the regret." Her eyes were bright with tears, but her smile was radiant. Life is too short and too precious to spend it holding on to darkness. Choose the light. Every single day, choose the light. The interview aired on national television. Thousands of people reached out to say that Sarah's words had inspired them. Survivors of trauma, people facing impossible situations, anyone who had ever felt lost and alone and hopeless. Sarah's story gave them hope. Her strength gave them courage. Her words reminded them that even the darkest night eventually ends. And that morning, when it comes, is all the more beautiful for the darkness that came before. Kyle watched the interview with Sarah by his side. When it ended, he turned to her. "I am so proud of you." Sarah smiled. "I could not have done any of this without you." Kyle shook his head. "You survived 3 years of hell all on your own. You are the strongest person I have ever known." Sarah leaned into him. "We are stronger together," she said softly. "That is the real lesson of our story. We cannot do it alone. We need each other." From the living room, they could hear Leo explaining something to Hope in great detail. Probably dinosaurs. Probably the importance of the velociraptor. Sarah laughed. "Come on. We should rescue Hope before she gets a complete paleontology education." They walked into the living room together. Leo was indeed showing Hope his dinosaur collection, now much expanded from the early days. Hope was staring at the toys with wide, fascinated eyes. "This one is my favorite," Leo was saying. "The velociraptor. He is small, but he is really smart and really fast." Hope reached out and grabbed the dinosaur. She immediately put it in her mouth. Leo sighed. "We are going to have to work on that." Sarah scooped up Hope and settled onto the couch. Kyle sat beside her, and Leo climbed up to join them. The four of them, together. A family. Outside, the sun was setting over the garden. The jasmine was in bloom. And inside that modest house on that quiet street, there was more love and happiness than all the mansions in the world could contain. This is where our story ends. But for the Thorne family, it was really just the beginning. A beginning built on hope. A beginning built on love. A beginning built on the belief that no matter how dark things get, there is always a way back to the light. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for believing in the power of hope. Thank you for staying until the very end. Now go out and write your own story. Hold on to the people you love. Fight for the things that matter. And never, ever give up. Your happy ending is out there waiting for you. All you have to do is keep going until you find it. I believe in you, and I will see you in the next story. Click on that video now. Trust me, you will not regret it.